From now on, Mom, you eat your own food. Ethan stared at me from across the dining room table, his arms crossed, wearing that hard expression I didn't recognize on him. Beside him, Chloe barely smiled, enjoying every second of my silence. Stop thinking I'm going to take care of an old woman. The words came out of his mouth with such coldness that I felt the air in the room turn heavy. I was standing by the kitchen, a plate of food in my hands, the same plate I had prepared, thinking I would share it with them, like we used to, like we always did when his father was still alive. I didn't say anything. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just set the plate on the table carefully, took a deep breath, and walked toward the front door of their house. Chloe muttered something I couldn't quite hear, but I heard the mocking laugh she let out afterward. Ethan didn't stop me. He didn't apologize. He just stood there, watching his 68-year-old mother walk out of his house as if she were a stranger. When I got back to my small apartment that night, I sat on the living room sofa and looked at the empty walls. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't play music. I just sat there, in the silence, feeling the weight of those words over and over. From now on, Mom, you eat your own food. My name is Eleanor Reyes. I am 68 years old, and I have lived alone since my husband, Arthur, died 5 years ago. 5 years in which I learned to cook for one person, to sleep in an empty bed, to celebrate birthdays with no one to blow out the candles with me. 5 years in which my only son was my only company, my only reason to keep going, or so I thought. That night, lying in my bed, I remembered every moment that had brought me here. I remembered when Ethan was little and would hug me before bed. I remembered when he told me that when he grew up, he would always take care of me, that he would never leave me alone. I remembered his graduation, his wedding, the day he introduced me to Chloe and told me she was the love of his life. I welcomed her with open arms. I welcomed her into my family. I thought I would finally have a daughter, someone to share recipes with, stories, afternoon coffee. But Chloe never saw me as a mother. She saw me as competition, as a nuisance in the life she wanted to build with my son, and slowly, without me realizing it, Ethan began to change. At first, it was small comments. Mom, don't come over without calling first. Mom, Chloe needs her space. Mom, we're busy this weekend. I understood. They were a young couple. They needed their time. So I waited. I waited for them to call, to invite me, to include me in their plans. But the calls became shorter, the visits more spaced out, and the words, colder. What Ethan didn't know, what he never knew because he never asked, was that every month since his father died, I transferred money to him. It wasn't much, but it was what I could spare. $200. $300 when I could save a little extra. I lived on my widow's pension, a small amount that barely covered my rent, food, and utilities. But I always found a way to set aside something for Ethan. Because he was my son. Because I thought he needed it. Because a mother never stops taking care of her children, no matter how old they are. He never thanked me for those transfers. He never asked if I was okay, if I had enough, if I needed help. He just received the money every month and went on with his life, with his wife, with his plans. And I went on with mine, waking up every morning at 6, making coffee in my small coffee pot, eating toast with a little jam, watching the news on my old television, walking to the grocery store to buy what I needed, returning home, cooking, cleaning, sleeping. My life had become a silent, lonely routine, interrupted only by the bank transfers I made each month and Ethan's occasional calls that lasted less than 5 minutes. But that night, after hearing those words, something changed inside me. From now on, Mom, you eat your own food. I got out of bed and walked to the small desk I have in the living room. I opened the drawer and took out a folder where I kept all my important documents, old passports, birth certificates, the deed to this house which I inherited from my parents, and the bank receipts. One by one, I took out every transfer receipt I had made over the last 5 years, every deposit, every wire, every sacrifice I made by eating less so my son could have more. I spread them out on the table and counted them. 60 transfers in total, some for $200, others for $300. Once, I managed to send $500 because I sold some jewelry Arthur had given me for our anniversary. In total, I had sent him more than $15,000 in those 5 years. $15,000 that came out of my widow's pension. $15,000 that cost me nights without dinner. $15,000 that forced me to walk instead of taking the bus just to save money. $15,000 that represented my love as a mother. And my son called me an old woman. He told me he wouldn't take care of me. I put the receipts back in the folder with great care. I organized them by date, from oldest to newest. I closed the folder and placed it in the center of the table. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger. I just felt a strange clarity, like when the fog lifts in the morning and you can finally see the path in front of you. I went back to bed, and that night I slept better than I had in years. The following days passed with a strange calm. I woke up as usual at 6 o'clock in the morning, made my coffee, ate my toast. But something had changed in me, something I didn't fully understand myself. It was as if I had woken up from a long dream. My routine was the same, but now I lived it differently. I walked to the grocery store every third day to buy fresh vegetables, chicken, rice, beans. I always bought only what was necessary. Nothing more. I had learned to calculate exactly how much I needed so I wouldn't waste anything. When you live alone and your pension is barely $800 a month, every penny counts. Of those $800, $300 went to the rent for this small 2-bedroom apartment. $100 for utilities, light, water, and gas. Another $100 for the blood pressure medication and the cholesterol pills the doctor prescribed for me 2 years ago. That left me with $300 for food, transportation, and any emergencies. And from that $300, I set aside $200 every month to send to Ethan. I lived on $100 a month for everything else. Now, sitting in my small kitchen, doing the math in an old notebook, I wondered how I had managed to survive like that for 5 years. How had I not realized how absurd it was to sacrifice myself that way for a son who didn't even call to ask how I was? I looked around my kitchen. The walls had water stains that I could never afford to repair. The stove was old, one of those you have to light with a match because the automatic igniter stopped working years ago. The refrigerator made a strange noise every time the compressor shut off, but it still worked, so there was no reason to change it. My house was humble, very humble, but it was mine. I inherited it from my parents when they died, so many years ago that sometimes I struggle to remember their faces clearly. They bought it with a lifetime of work. My father was a construction worker. My mother sold tamales on the corner by the market. Together, they managed to buy this small house, with thin walls and concrete floors, but with a solid roof over our heads. When I married Arthur, we came to live here. This is where Ethan was born, where he grew up, where he learned to walk, to talk, to dream. In this kitchen, I prepared thousands of meals for him. In that living room, I helped him with his homework. In that room, which I now use for storage, he slept when he was a child. Arthur worked at a textile factory. He didn't earn much, but it was enough. I stayed home taking care of Ethan, cleaning, cooking, making every dollar stretch as far as possible. We were happy with little. Or at least, I thought we were. When Ethan turned 18 and went off to college, Arthur and I were left alone in this house. They were quiet years, years of routine. He worked, I kept the house, and on Sundays, we would visit Ethan in his student apartment. Then Ethan graduated, got a good job at a tech company, met Chloe, and got married. We went to the wedding. I cried with happiness seeing my son looking so handsome in his suit, so in love with that young woman with the perfect smile and white dress. 2 years after the wedding, Arthur died. It was sudden, a massive heart attack while he slept. I woke up one morning, and he wasn't breathing. There were no goodbyes, no last words, just silence. Ethan came to the funeral. He stayed with me for 3 days and then went back to his life. Chloe was barely present, always on her phone, always looking bored. I remember she told me she couldn't stay long because she had important commitments at work. Commitments more important than accompanying her mother-in-law at her husband's funeral. After the funeral, I was left alone in this house, completely alone. The first few months were the hardest. I would wake up in the night expecting to find Arthur beside me. I would cook too much food, forgetting it was just me now. I would set the table for 2 people out of habit. Slowly, I adapted to the loneliness. And it was in that loneliness that I started sending money to Ethan. Not because he asked me to. He never asked. I just thought he needed it. I thought it would be my way of continuing to be useful, of continuing to be his mother, of continuing to have a purpose in this life that had suddenly become so empty. Every month, like clockwork, I went to the bank and made the transfer. Then I would come home and file the receipt in my folder, and I would get on with my life. Ethan never mentioned the money. Not to thank me, not to ask about it. It just appeared in his account, and he used it. What did he use it for? I didn't know. I never asked. A mother doesn't ask those things. A mother just gives. Or so I thought. Now, sitting in my kitchen with the account book in front of me, I added and subtracted numbers, trying to imagine what my life would be like if I had kept that money for myself. $15,000 in 5 years. I could have repaired the walls. I could have bought a new stove. I could have gone to the dentist to fix the molars that ached. I could have bought new clothes instead of wearing the same old things from 10 years ago. I could have lived with dignity. But I chose to give it to my son. And my son called me an old woman. He told me to eat my own food. He made me feel like a burden. I closed the notebook and put it in the drawer, next to the folder of receipts. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat by the living room window. From there, I could see the street. People rushed by, children on their way to school, street vendors with their carts. Life went on as normal while I was there. Suspended in this moment of painful clarity, I thought about Arthur. I thought about what he would tell me if he were here. Arthur was a quiet man, a few words, but wise. He always told me that raising a child wasn't about making them dependent, but about teaching them to fly on their own. And when they fly on their own, he'd say, you have to let them go with love, not tie them down with guilt or with sacrifices they never asked for. I hadn't let Ethan go. I had tied him down with bank transfers, with my need to feel useful, with my fear of loneliness. And he had cut those ties in the worst way possible. The days passed slowly. 1 week, 2 weeks. Ethan didn't call. I didn't call him either. It was the first time in 5 years that so much time had passed without speaking to my son, and the feeling was strange. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more of an emptiness, like when you finish a long book and don't know what to do with the time you have left. The 15th of the month arrived. The day I always made the transfer. I got up early, made my coffee, dressed carefully. I took my purse and walked to the bank, just as I always did. There was a long line. I waited patiently for my turn, watching people come and go, doing their transactions, living their lives. When it was my turn, the teller greeted me with a smile. She knew me by now. After 5 years of coming every month to the same bank at the same time, faces become familiar. "Good morning, Mrs. Reyes," she said. "The usual transfer?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. She already knew why I was there. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "Not today." The teller looked at me with surprise but said nothing more. She just nodded and asked if I needed any other service. I told her no. I left the bank with the $200 still in my account, feeling something strange in my chest. It wasn't relief. It wasn't satisfaction. It was simply the feeling of having made a decision. I walked back home the long way, the route that goes through the park. It had been a long time since I'd walked that way. I always took the shortest path to save time and energy. But today, I had time. I had my whole life ahead of me, in fact. I sat on a bench under a large tree and watched the people. A young mother pushed a stroller. A man sold ice cream. 2 old men played chess at a concrete table. Life was simple here, in this park I had known since I was a girl. I thought about Chloe. Chloe Brooks. That was her name before she married my son. Now she was Chloe Reyes, although she rarely used my family's name. She preferred to introduce herself as Chloe Brooks, as if the Reyes name wasn't good enough for her. I met her 6 years ago, when Ethan brought her to dinner for the first time. She arrived in an elegant dress, perfect makeup, high heels. I had prepared mole, rice, and beans. Homemade food, made with love. She barely touched her food. She said she was on a diet, that she was watching her figure for her job as an image consultant. An image consultant, that was her job. She helped people with money dress better, project an image of success. And I suppose, for her, having a humble mother-in-law didn't fit with the image she wanted to project. From the beginning, I noticed how she looked at me. With that mix of pity and contempt that some people have when they see someone they consider inferior. She looked at my small house, my old furniture, my simple clothes. And I saw in her eyes that she had already decided I wasn't good enough. But Ethan loved her. Or at least, it seemed that way. He looked at her with adoration, with those eyes of a man in love that make you forgive any flaw. And I, as a mother, wanted my son to be happy. So I accepted Chloe. I welcomed her. I tried to build a relationship with her. I tried inviting her for coffee. She said she didn't have time. I tried teaching her to cook a few dishes. She said she didn't cook. That's what restaurants were for. I tried asking about her family, about her life. She answered me in monosyllables, always with her phone in her hand, always distracted. After the wedding, things got worse. Ethan and Chloe moved into a condo in an expensive neighborhood. A modern place with hardwood floors, big windows, a gourmet kitchen. I went to visit them once. Chloe greeted me with a forced smile and gave me a quick tour, making it clear with every word that this was her space, her territory. "Look, Eleanor," she said, using my first name instead of mom or mother-in-law. "We have a rule here. Always call before you come. You know, we value our privacy a lot." Ethan said nothing. He just nodded as Chloe spoke, as if her words were absolute law. From then on, every visit had to be coordinated days in advance. And every time I proposed a date, there was always an excuse. They had an important dinner. Chloe had a session with a client. They were tired and needed to rest. The visits became less and less frequent until they practically disappeared. But I kept sending the money. Every month, like clockwork, $200 that left my pension and entered Ethan's account. And never, not once, did he thank me. He never asked if I was okay, if I had enough, if I needed help. The change in Ethan was gradual but constant. At first, he still called me every once in a while. Short, superficial conversations, but at least they were something. He'd ask how I was, and I'd always say fine, even if it wasn't true. Then the calls spaced out more, once a month, once every 2 months, until they practically ceased to exist. And when I called him, he rarely answered. He'd send me a text later saying he was busy, that he'd call me back. That later never came. Chloe, I learned over time, had put ideas in his head. Ideas that his mother was part of his past, that they needed to focus on their future, that I was a distraction from their goals. I knew this because I once overheard a conversation between them when I went to drop off some documents Ethan had forgotten at my house. I arrived without calling. That was my mistake. I knocked on the door, and no one answered, but I heard voices inside. The door was slightly ajar. I walked in, calling their names, and then I heard Chloe's voice from the bedroom. "I don't understand why your mom always has to be meddling in our lives. Ethan, you're a grown man. You need to cut the umbilical cord." Ethan answered something I couldn't make out. Then Chloe's voice again. "Don't you see it? She makes you feel guilty, so you'll keep being her little boy. But you're not a child anymore. You're my husband, and I need you to be present here, with me, not living in the past with her." I stood paralyzed in the entryway, the documents in my hand. I didn't know what to do. I left silently and closed the door behind me. I walked down the building stairs with tears in my eyes. I left the documents with the doorman and went home. That night I cried. I cried for the son I was losing. I cried for the relationship I would never have with my daughter-in-law. I cried for Arthur, who wasn't there to advise me, to tell me what to do. But the next day, I dried my tears and carried on. Because that's what one does. Carry on. And I kept sending the money. Because I thought if I stopped, I would lose the last thread connecting me to my son. Now, sitting on that park bench, I realized how foolish I had been. The money didn't connect me to Ethan. It just made me feel useful. It just fed the illusion that I still had a place in his life. The truth was, Ethan had already chosen. He had chosen Chloe. He had chosen a life where I didn't fit, and I had been clinging to something that no longer existed. I got up from the bench and walked back home. When I arrived, I checked my phone for messages. Nothing from Ethan. I checked my missed calls. None. I checked if he had sent any texts in the last few weeks. There was nothing. My son hadn't even noticed that we had stopped talking. That night, I made dinner just for myself. I made chicken and vegetable soup, white rice, refried beans. I set the table for one person. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, something I hadn't done in years. I always ate quickly, almost without thinking, because eating alone felt like a constant reminder of my solitude. But that night was different. That night, I enjoyed my food. I enjoyed the silence. I enjoyed being with myself. After washing the dishes, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea. I turned on the television but paid no attention. My mind was elsewhere, thinking about everything that had happened, about all the decisions that had brought me to this point. And then my phone rang. It was Ethan. I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling my heart speed up. Part of me wanted to answer immediately, to hear his voice, to pretend nothing had happened. But another part of me, a new part that was just waking up, told me to wait. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. Finally, I answered. "Hello," I said in a calm voice. "Mom," Ethan said. And for a moment, just a moment, my heart softened hearing that word, Mom. It had been so long since he'd called me that, with that tone. But then he spoke again, and I understood why he was calling. "Mom, I need to ask you a favor." I said nothing. I just waited for him to continue, holding the phone to my ear, feeling that small hope that had sparked at the sound of his voice quickly fade. "It's my birthday next Saturday. I'm turning 42. Chloe wants to have a big dinner. You know how she is with these things. She's going to invite the whole family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, some friends. About 20 people in total." I remained silent, waiting, knowing exactly where this conversation was going. The thing is, well, Chloe is super busy with work, and I have some important projects to deliver too, and we thought, maybe you could help us by making dinner. You know, like before. You cook so well, Mom. Nobody makes mole like you do. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath. "So, I'm calling to see if you can come over on Saturday afternoon, around 4 o'clock, so you have time to prepare everything. Dinner would be at about 8, nothing too elaborate. You know, maybe mole, rice, beans, an appetizer, dessert, whatever you decide. You know how to cook for a lot of people." I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling of my living room. The cracks I had never been able to repair, the water stains, the old paint peeling in pieces. "Mom, are you there?" "Yes," I finally replied. "I'm here. So, can you? We really need your help. Chloe already invited everyone, and it would be really embarrassing to have to cancel or order from a restaurant. You know how the family is. Everyone expects homemade food on these occasions." How convenient, I thought. Now homemade food was important. Now they needed me. Now I was good for something. "Ethan," I said in a calm voice, "are you asking me to go to your house and cook for 20 people? "Well, yeah, it's my birthday, Mom. And you've always been there for my birthdays. Besides, we haven't seen each other in a while. It'll be a good chance to spend time together." Spend time together. That word sounded hollow coming from him, as if the last few months hadn't happened. As if he hadn't told me to eat my own food. As if he hadn't called me an old woman. "And the ingredients?" I asked. "Who is going to buy them?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Well, I thought you could take care of that too. You know best what's needed. We'll reimburse you later." Obviously, they would reimburse me later. With the money I myself had been sending them for 5 years. "All right," I said finally. Ethan sighed in relief on the other end. "Thanks, Mom. I knew I could count on you. You're the best." And he hung up, without asking how I was, without asking if I had plans that Saturday, without asking if I had the money to buy food for 20 people. He just hung up, satisfied that he had gotten what he wanted. I sat on the sofa with the phone in my hand for a long time. It had gotten completely dark outside. The streetlights were turning on, one by one. I could hear the neighbors in their homes, the sound of televisions, of conversations, of life. And I was there, alone, holding a phone that had just brought me back to the reality of my relationship with my son. He needed me, but only when it was convenient for him. I stood up slowly and walked to the small desk where I kept my folder. I took it out of the drawer and opened it carefully. All those receipts, all those transfers. 5 years of sacrifices, ordered chronologically. I looked at them one by one, remembering every time I had gone to the bank. Remembering every time I had chosen not to buy something I needed so I could send him that money. Remembering every time I had eaten less so he could have more. And now he was asking me to cook for 20 people. I closed the folder and put it back in the drawer. But this time, instead of leaving it there forgotten, I placed it on top of other documents. Visible. Accessible. As if I were preparing it for something. I spent the next few days doing calculations. I went to the grocery store and checked prices. Mole for 20 people. Chicken. Chiles. Chocolate. Spices. Rice. Beans. Tortillas. Salad. Ingredients for appetizers. Ingredients for dessert. Drinks. I added it all up mentally as I walked through the store aisles. It would easily be $300. Maybe more if I wanted to do it right, make it abundant, like the family expected. $300. Almost half of my monthly pension. And Ethan had said they would reimburse me later. Later. That word, so vague, so imprecise. When was later? Next week? Next month? Never? I returned home without buying anything yet. I sat in the kitchen with my account book and ran the numbers again. If I spent $300 on the birthday dinner, I would have $500 left for the entire month. Of that $500, $300 was for rent. I'd be left with $200 for utilities, medicine, and my own food. It wouldn't be enough. I would have to borrow money or skip meals. Or I could just not send him the money this month either. It had already been 2 weeks since I'd stopped. I could continue and use those $200 I normally sent him to cover the dinner expenses. But even then, it was still my money, my sacrifice, my effort. I closed the notebook and stared out the window. The sky was overcast. It looked like it was going to rain. I thought about Arthur again. I thought about what he would do in my place. Arthur was proud, but he was also practical. He didn't let anyone walk all over him, but he didn't seek out unnecessary confrontations, either. He solved things with actions, not words. An idea began to form in my mind. An idea that at first seemed absurd, even cruel. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. I got up and went to the room I use for storage. Old boxes, clothes I no longer wear, furniture I inherited from my parents. I searched through the boxes until I found what I needed. A medium-sized cardboard box. Empty. I brought it to the living room and placed it on the table. Then I went to the desk and took out my folder of receipts. I opened it and began to take out every receipt, every proof of the transfers I had made for 5 years. I organized them all on the table, side by side, creating a paper mosaic that represented my love, my sacrifice, my naivety. 60 receipts. 60 months. 60 times I had chosen my son over myself. I counted the total one more time to be sure. $15,200 exactly. Some months I had managed to send more. Other months I'd had to settle for less. But the average was clear. More than $250 a month for 5 years. I took a blank sheet of paper and a pen. In clear handwriting, I wrote the title, Bank Transfers from Eleanor Reyes to Ethan Reyes. Period. May 2020, April 2025. Below, I made a list, month by month, year by year, the exact amount of each transfer. At the bottom, I wrote the total in large numbers. $15,200. I reread what I had written. It was simple, direct, irrefutable. I put the sheet, along with all the receipts, inside the cardboard box. I closed the box carefully and left it on the table. I still didn't know exactly what I was going to do with that box, but I knew I needed it. I knew those papers were going to speak for me in a way my words never could. On Friday afternoon, I went to the grocery store. I bought everything needed for the birthday dinner. Chicken, chiles, chocolate, rice, beans, vegetables for the salad, flour to make the dessert, drinks, napkins, everything. As I paid at the checkout, I kept a running total in my head. 150, 200, 250, 280, $320 in total. $320 that came out of my purse. $320 that represented almost half of what I had to live on for the month. I carried the heavy bags back home. My arms ached. My legs ached. My back ached. But I kept walking, step by step, until I reached my door. I left all the bags in the kitchen and sat down to rest. My hands were shaking from the effort. I hadn't eaten well that day, trying to save money. The hunger and exhaustion made me feel dizzy, but it didn't matter. Tomorrow was Ethan's birthday. Tomorrow, I would cook for 20 people. Tomorrow, I would do what my son had asked. I barely slept that night. I tossed and turned for hours, thinking about the next day, imagining every detail of what was going to happen. At 5 o'clock in the morning, I got up. There was no point in trying to sleep anymore. I made coffee and sat in the kitchen. It was still dark outside. The city was sleeping silently. I was there, alone, about to start a day that I knew would change everything. I started cooking at 6 o'clock in the morning. The mole required time, patience, love. That's how my mother had taught me when I was young. Every ingredient had to be added at the precise moment. Every spice had to be toasted for the exact amount of time. There were no shortcuts to a good mole. I spent hours in that small kitchen, toasting chiles, grinding spices, preparing the chocolate. The aroma filled the whole house, an aroma that reminded me of better days, of when Arthur was alive, of when Ethan was a child who would hug me and tell me I was the best cook in the world. By noon, the mole was ready, perfect, dark, thick, with that exact balance of sweet and spicy that only comes from years of practice. I tasted it, and for a moment, felt proud. I still knew how to do it right. Then I prepared the rice. White, fluffy, with its touch of garlic and onion. I had left the beans soaking overnight. I cooked them with onion, garlic, and a sprig of episode. They were soft, perfect for refrying later. I would prepare the salad there, at Ethan's house, so it would be fresh. Same with the tortillas, but everything else was ready. For dessert, I had decided to make flan. A large flan for 20 people. I prepared it carefully, beating the eggs, mixing the milk, preparing the caramel. I put it in the oven and waited for it to cook slowly. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon when I finished cooking. I was exhausted. I hadn't eaten anything all day, too busy preparing food for others. I sat for a moment in the kitchen, looking at all the pots, all the containers full of food, enough food for 20 people. Food that had cost $320 and 6 hours of work. I took a quick shower and changed my clothes. I put on a simple dress, one I save for special occasions. I brushed my hair and tied it back in a bun. I looked in the mirror and saw a 68-year-old woman, tired, with wrinkles on her forehead and around her eyes. A woman who had worked her whole life and was still working, even when no one appreciated it. At 4 o'clock sharp, I called a taxi. I couldn't carry all that food on the bus. The taxi cost me $15, but I had no other choice. The driver helped me load all the pots and containers. He asked if I was going to a party. I told him it was my son's birthday. He smiled and said my son was lucky to have a mother who would cook like that for him. I didn't answer. I just looked out the window as the taxi moved through the city streets. We arrived at the building where Ethan lived, a modern 10-story building with a doorman and an elevator. The driver helped me unload the items and left them at the entrance. I gave him a $2 tip. He left, thanking me. I stood there, surrounded by pots and containers, in the elegant lobby of that building that was so different from my home. The doorman looked at me curiously but said nothing. I buzzed Ethan's apartment from the intercom. Yes? Chloe's voice answered. It's me, I said. Eleanor. Oh, you're here. Come on up. We're on the 7th floor, apartment 703. The doorman helped me load the things into the elevator. I went up alone, watching the numbers change on the screen. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The doors opened, and I stepped out, carrying what I could. I had to make 3 trips from the elevator to the apartment to get everything. Chloe opened the door on the 3rd trip. She was wearing an elegant red dress, perfect makeup, her hair styled in soft waves. She looked me up and down without saying anything. Then she saw all the pots in the hallway. "Oh, Eleanor," she said finally. "You brought all this. How nice." She didn't call me Mom. She never called me Mom. Always Eleanor. As if I were an employee, not her mother-in-law. Come in, come in. The kitchen is this way. You already know where it is." I entered, carrying the last of the items. The condo was just as I remembered it. Large, modern, clean, with elegant furniture and minimalist decor. Everything in shades of gray and white. Everything perfectly coordinated. Ethan was sitting in the living room, looking at something on his laptop. He glanced up when I came in. "Hey, Mom," he said, without getting up. "Thanks for coming." That was it. Thanks for coming. As if I had come to a casual get-together, not to spend hours cooking for his birthday. I took everything to the kitchen. An immense, modern kitchen with stainless steel appliances that probably cost more than everything I owned in my house. I started taking the food out of the containers, organizing it, preparing what was left. Chloe came into the kitchen after a few minutes. "Eleanor, I need you to have everything ready by 8 o'clock sharp. The guests will start arriving at 7:30, but we'll serve dinner at 8. Do you think you can have everything ready by then?" "Yes," I answered without looking at her. "Perfect. Oh, and please, when the guests arrive, stay in the kitchen, so you can serve things as needed. We don't want the food to get cold." I stayed quiet for a moment, processing what she had just said. She wanted me to stay in the kitchen, hidden, serving, as if I were the hired help. "Did you understand, Eleanor?" "Yes," I said finally. "I understand." Chloe left the kitchen, satisfied. I heard her talking with Ethan in the living room, laughing about something, probably making the final preparations for her perfect party. I was left alone in that enormous kitchen, surrounded by the food I had prepared with my own hands, with my own money, with my own effort. And for the first time all day, I felt like the tears wanted to come. But I didn't cry. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I took a deep breath and continued working. I heated the mole. I prepared the rice. I refried the beans. I made the salad. I warmed the tortillas. I put everything into the elegant serving dishes Chloe had left on the kitchen counter. At 7:20, the guests began to arrive. I heard the voices from the kitchen, effusive greetings, laughter, the sound of glasses clinking, background music. I recognized some of the voices. My sister, Helen, my cousin, David, Aunt Clara. All of them, family that was once close to me, who had once shared meals in my home, who had once treated me with affection. Not one of them came into the kitchen to say hello. At 8 o'clock sharp, Chloe poked her head in. "It's time. Start serving." I took the dishes one by one and carried them to the dining room. The table was set elegantly. White plates, crystal glass, cloth napkins, Lee candles. Everything perfect, everything coordinated. I placed each dish in its spot. The mole in the center, the rice on one side, the beans on the other, the salad, the hot tortillas. Everything arranged like a banquet. The guests approached the table with exclamations of admiration. "How delicious. It looks incredible. Chloe, did you cook all this yourself?" I froze when I heard that. I looked at Chloe. She was smiling, accepting the compliments with false modesty. "Well," she said, "I had a little help. But yes, I worked very hard. A little help." That's what I was to her. A little help. Ethan didn't say anything either. He sat at the head of the table, smiling, enjoying the attention, the affection from the family, the food his mother had prepared but that his wife was taking credit for. I went back to the kitchen before anyone could see me. I sat on a stool by the counter and looked at my hands. Old, wrinkled, stained hands. Hands that had worked a whole lifetime. Hands that had cooked thousands of meals. Hands that had carried my son when he was a baby. And there I was, hidden in a kitchen, while my family ate what I had prepared and gave the credit to someone else. From the kitchen, I could hear everything. The laughter, the conversations, the compliments about the food. Every word was like a needle stabbing my chest. Chloe, this mole is spectacular. Where did you learn to cook like this? The voice was my sister, Helen's. My own sister, who had eaten my mole hundreds of times, who knew perfectly well who had prepared it. Oh, Auntie, it's just a matter of practice, Chloe replied in that sweet voice she used when she wanted to impress, and using good ingredients. Of course, good ingredients that I had bought with my money. My money that I barely had enough of to live on. And this flan, my goodness, is it homemade? Of course, Chloe answered. I don't like buying store-bought desserts. I prefer to make them myself. Lie after lie, and no one said a thing. Or maybe no one knew the truth. Maybe Ethan and Chloe had told everyone she had cooked. Maybe no one knew I was there, hidden in the kitchen like a shadow. I got off the stool and peeked slightly through the doorway. I could see the table from there. 20 people sitting, eating, laughing, enjoying. My family. The family that was once mine. I saw my sister Helen, her hair now completely white, sitting next to her husband Robert. I saw my cousin David with his wife Susan. I saw Aunt Clara, who was over 80 years old but still as lively as ever. I saw nephews who had grown up, who were now adults with their own families, all of them eating my food, none of them asking for me. And your mom, Ethan? Aunt Clara suddenly asked. Is she not coming? My heart skipped a beat. Someone had asked for me. Someone had noticed my absence. Ethan took a moment to answer. I saw him take a sip of wine before speaking. She's busy, he said finally. She couldn't make it. Busy. That was his answer. She couldn't come because she was busy. Not because she was in the kitchen preparing all the food they were enjoying. Not because she had spent $320 in 6 hours cooking. Simply busy. What a shame, said Aunt Clara. It's been so long since I've seen her. How is she? Fine, Ethan replied curtly. She's fine. And just like that, the conversation about me ended. No one asked any more. No one insisted. They just kept eating, kept laughing, kept enjoying their party. I returned to my spot on the stool in the kitchen. I felt an emptiness in my stomach, not just from hunger but from something deeper. A void that no food could fill. I hadn't eaten anything all day. I had been so busy cooking that I had forgotten about myself. I looked around the kitchen for something I could eat. I had prepared so much that surely there was something left over. But Chloe had been very specific with the portions. She had calculated exactly what was needed for 20 people. There were no leftovers. Or at least, not yet. I waited. I heard them serve the dessert. I heard more compliments about the flan. I heard them toast to Ethan, wishing him a happy birthday, health, success, prosperity. No one toasted the person who had made that dinner possible. An hour passed, then another. Finally, around 10 o'clock at night, the guests began to leave. I heard the goodbyes, the promises to see each other soon, the thanks. Thank you for dinner, Chloe. Everything was delicious. Thanks for having us, Ethan. We had an amazing time. One by one, they left. Aunt Clara, Helen and Robert, David and Susan. All of them. Not one of them came into the kitchen to say goodbye to me. Not one of them knew I was there. When the last guest left, I sat there waiting. Waiting for Ethan or Chloe to come into the kitchen. Waiting for some thanks. Some acknowledgement. Chloe finally came in, but not to thank me. She came in with a pile of dirty dishes. Eleanor, can you wash all this before you leave? I'm exhausted, and I have an important meeting early tomorrow. She left the dishes in the sink and walked out without waiting for an answer. I stared at those dishes. 20 dirty plates, 20 glasses, silverware, serving dishes, pots, all dirty, all waiting for me to clean them. I stood up slowly. My legs could barely hold me from the exhaustion. I turned on the hot water and began to wash. One by one, plate by plate, glass by glass. As I washed, the tears finally began to fall. Silent tears that mixed with the soapy water. Tears of exhaustion, of humiliation, of pain. When had it come to this? When had I become invisible? When did I stop being a mother and become a servant? I finished washing everything around 11 o'clock at night. The kitchen was spotless, everything clean, everything put away, as if nothing had happened. I put my empty containers in a bag. Chloe hadn't returned them with food, as would have been polite. She had emptied them completely into her own dishes, so it would look like she had cooked everything. I walked out of the kitchen and found Ethan and Chloe sitting in the living room, each with their phone in hand, looking at their screens. "I'm finished," I said in a low voice. "I'm leaving." Ethan looked up for a moment. "Oh, right. Thanks for coming, Mom. Everything was delicious. That was it. Thanks for coming." As if I had been just another guest. As if I hadn't spent the entire day cooking. As if I hadn't spent $320 of my own pension. "And the reimbursement?" I asked. "You said you would reimburse me for the ingredients." Ethan looked at Chloe. Chloe looked at Ethan. There was an awkward silence. "Oh, right, of course," Ethan said finally. "How much was it?" $320. I saw Chloe make a face, as if the amount seemed exaggerated, as if I had overspent on purpose. $320, she repeated. "What did you spend so much on?" "On food for 20 people, I replied, trying to stay calm. "Mole, chicken, rice, beans, salad, dessert, everything you ate." Chloe sighed dramatically. "It's just, we don't have cash right now, Eleanor. We'll transfer it to you next week, okay?" Next week. There it was again, that vague, imprecise later. "Fine," I said. "Next week." I didn't have the energy to argue. I didn't have the energy for anything. I took my bag with the empty containers and walked to the door. Neither of them got up to walk me out. Neither of them offered to call me a taxi. Neither of them asked how I was going to get home at this hour of the night. I went down in the elevator alone. I crossed the elegant lobby with my bag of containers. The doorman looked at me with pity, but said nothing. I stepped out onto the street. It was cold. I hadn't brought a sweater because it was still warm when I left my house that afternoon. I walked to the main avenue looking for a taxi. One passed. I raised my hand, but it didn't stop. Another passed. It didn't stop either. A third one finally pulled over. I got in the taxi and gave him my address. The driver started driving without a word. I looked out the window, watching the city lights pass by. It was almost midnight. I had left my house 8 hours ago. 8 hours of cooking, serving, cleaning. 8 hours of invisible work. 8 hours of humiliation. The taxi charged me $18 because it was late and there was traffic. I paid him with the last few bills I had left in my wallet. I got out, carrying my bag, and entered my house. Everything was dark. Everything was cold. Everything was silent. I left the bag in the kitchen and sat on the living room sofa without even turning on the lights. I sat there in the darkness, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. And then, in the middle of that darkness, in that silence, in that pain, something inside me changed. I no longer felt sadness. I no longer felt the urge to cry. I felt clarity. I felt determination. I felt that the time had come to do something I should have done a long time ago. I stood up, turned on the light, and walked to the desk. I took out the cardboard box I had prepared days earlier. The box with all the transfer receipts. The box with the evidence of 5 years of sacrifice. I opened it and reviewed everything again. Every receipt, every number, every date. Then I took a new sheet of paper and began to write something else. A list. A detailed list of everything I had spent that day for the birthday dinner. Chicken, $40. Child's, $30. Chocolate, $25. Spices, $20. Rice, $10. Beans, $8. Vegetables, $15. Tortillas, $12. Ingredients for flan, $20. Drinks, $30. Napkins and disposables, $10. And at the bottom, taxi, $15. Taxi, return, $18. Total, $350. $3. I had spent more than I thought, and they hadn't reimbursed me for any of it. I placed that sheet with the other documents in the box. I closed the box and put it in a visible place, right by the front door. I still didn't know exactly when or how, but I knew that this box was going to serve an important purpose. The days went on. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Ethan didn't call. He didn't send a text. He didn't ask if I had gotten home okay that night. He didn't mention the reimbursement he had promised. I didn't reach out to him either. On Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after the birthday, my phone rang. It was Ethan. I answered after the third ring. "Mom," he said in a cheerful voice, as if nothing had happened. "How are you?" "Fine," I replied, without emotion. "Great. Hey, I'm calling because Chloe and I were thinking. Next month is her birthday, and we want to do another dinner, a little bigger this time, like 30 people. Do you think you could help us out again?" The food at my birthday was incredible. Everyone was raving about it. I stayed silent, processing what I had just heard. They wanted me to do it again. Another dinner. More people. More work. More money. More humiliation. "And the reimbursement for the last dinner?" I asked in a calm voice. There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, right. Sorry, we totally forgot. It's just been a super heavy week at work. But we'll deposit it this week, for sure." This week. Another vague promise. "Ethan, I need that money," I said. "I spent over $300 of my pension." Yeah, I know. I'll deposit it tomorrow. I promise." "So, what do you say? Will you help us with Chloe's birthday?" "No." The word came out of my mouth before I could even think it. Firm, clear, definitive. "What?" Ethan asked, confused. I said no. "But, Mom, I'm not cooking for Chloe's birthday, Ethan. I'm not cooking for anyone anymore." "Why not? Did something happen? Are you mad about something?" I took a deep breath before answering. "I'm tired, Ethan. I'm 68 years old. Standing and cooking for 6 hours, washing dishes for 20 people, coming home alone at midnight in a taxi. It's too much for me. But you've always cooked for the family. It's what you do." That sentence hurt me more than he could possibly imagine. It's what you do. As if I only existed to serve others. As if I had no identity beyond cooking for my family. "Not anymore," I said simply. I heard Ethan talking to someone on his end, probably Chloe. Muffled voices. Then he came back to the phone. "Okay, Mom. If you don't want to do it, that's fine. We understand you're tired. But, could you lend us money to hire a caterer then? It's just, with all the expenses we have this month, we can't afford it." I was speechless. He was asking me for money after not reimbursing me for what I'd already spent? "How much do you need?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would infuriate me. "Well, since it's 30 people, maybe $500? I'll pay you back next month. I swear. I don't have $500 to lend you, Ethan." "No, but you always have savings." Savings. He thought I had savings. He had no idea I lived day to day, counting every penny, sacrificing month after month to send him money. "I don't have savings, Ethan. I live on an $800 pension per month. I barely have enough to survive." "But what about the money Dad left you when he died?" "There was no money, Ethan. Your father worked his whole life, but we had no savings. Everything went to the funeral and paying off debts we had. I already explained this to you years ago." "Oh, well then never mind. We'll find another solution." And he hung up, without saying goodbye, without asking anything else. He just hung up. I was left holding the phone, feeling a mixture of rage and sadness. My own son had no idea how I lived. He had no idea about my sacrifices. He had no idea about anything. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned for hours, thinking, remembering, trying to understand at what point I had lost my son. At what point did he stop seeing me as his mother and start seeing me only as someone useful? The next morning, Saturday, I decided to go for a walk. I needed fresh air. I needed to clear my mind. I walked aimlessly, letting my feet take me wherever they wanted. Without realizing it, I ended up at the neighborhood church. A small, old church with white walls and a modest bell tower. It had been years since I'd gone inside. Since Arthur died, my relationship with God had become distant. But that day, I went in. The church was almost empty. There were only 2 or 3 people praying silently. I sat in a pew at the back and looked toward the altar. I didn't pray. I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, in silence, feeling the peace that only exists in places like this. An old woman sat down next to me after a while. She must have been in her 80s, maybe older. She had a rosary in her hands and smelled of lavender. "Good morning," she said with a soft smile. "Good morning," I replied. "You look burdened with troubles, child." I looked at her, surprised. I didn't know her. How could she know what I was feeling? "I've been coming here for years," she continued, without waiting for my reply. "And I've learned to recognize when someone comes looking for answers." I said nothing. She kept talking. "Sometimes the answers aren't in praying or asking. They're in listening to what your heart already knows but your mind doesn't want to accept." "And what does my heart know?" I asked, almost in a whisper. "That you have value? That you deserve respect? That giving love doesn't mean letting them walk all over you?" Her words pierced me like an arrow. I felt tears begin to form in my eyes. "But he's my son," I said in a broken voice. "He's my only son, and you are his only mother. But he is not treating you as a mother should be treated. And you know it." I wiped the tears with the back of my hand. The old woman placed her wrinkled hand on mine. "Sometimes, child, the greatest love we can give is to teach them to value us, not with words, with actions." She stood up slowly, crossed herself in front of the altar, and left, leaving me alone with her words echoing in my head. Teach them to value us. With actions. I left the church with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I knew exactly what I had to do. I returned home and went straight to the desk. I took out the cardboard box with all the receipts. I placed it on the kitchen table and reviewed every document again. Then I took my phone and opened my banking app. I checked my account. There was still no deposit from Ethan. No reimbursement. Another broken promise. I made a decision right then. A decision that would change everything. I grabbed a sheet of paper and began to write. Not a letter of complaint. Not a goodbye letter. Just a simple, clear document. Family statement of account. From Eleanor Reyes to Ethan Reyes. Transfers made May 2020, April 2025. Total $15,200. $15,200. Expenses: Ethan's birthday. Date: last Saturday. Total $350. $353. Total sum owed $15,553. $15,553. Note: I am not requesting immediate payment of this amount. I am only requesting acknowledgement and respect. This list is not an invoice. It is a reminder that mothers have dignity, too. I read what I had written several times. It was direct. It was clear. It was true. I printed the document on the small, old printer I had stored away. I made 2 copies, one for me and one for Ethan. I filed my copy with the other documents in the box. I folded Ethan's copy carefully and put it in a white envelope. I wasn't going to send it yet. First, I would wait. I would see if he kept his promise to reimburse me. I would give him one last chance to do the right thing. A week passed. No deposit. No call. Nothing. Another week passed. Total silence. When the 3rd week arrived, my phone rang. It was Ethan again. "Mom, I have to tell you something important." My heart sped up. Maybe he was going to apologize. Maybe he was going to admit his mistake. Maybe he would change. "Chloe and I were talking," he continued, "and we decided we're going to host Christmas dinner this year. A big dinner for the whole family. Like 40 people. And we want you to—" I hung up. It was the first time in my life I had ever hung up the phone on my son, but I didn't regret it. The phone immediately rang again. I didn't answer. It rang again. I didn't answer. Finally, a text message came through. "Mom, I don't know why you hung up. I was just inviting you to Christmas. If you don't want to cook, that's fine. But at least come to the dinner. We miss you. We miss you." Those 2 words sounded so hollow, so false. I didn't reply to the message. That night, I took the envelope with the document I had prepared. I looked at it for a long time. It wasn't time to send it yet. But soon, very soon, the right time would come. And when that moment arrived, my son would finally understand what it meant to have a mother who respected herself. December arrived with a cold that chilled you to the bone. The streets filled with Christmas lights, with carols, with people shopping for gifts. I watched it all from my window, feeling like that world of celebrations no longer belonged to me. Ethan called 3 more times during that week. I didn't answer any of his calls. He sent messages. I didn't answer those, either. For the first time in 5 years, I was the one creating distance. I was the one deciding when and how to communicate. And that feeling of control over my own life gave me a strange peace. On the 15th of December, a Friday afternoon, someone knocked on my door. I wasn't expecting visitors. I looked through the peephole and saw Ethan standing there, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. My first instinct was not to open it, but something told me this moment had to happen, that it was necessary. I opened the door. "Mom," he said immediately, "why aren't you answering my calls?" I didn't invite him in. I stood in the doorway, staring at him. "What do you need, Ethan?" He seemed surprised by my tone. Cold, distant, a tone I had never used with him. "I need to talk to you. Can I come in?" I stepped aside and let him enter. He looked around the house as if he were seeing it for the first time. As if he suddenly realized how small it was, how old, how humble. He sat on the sofa without my invitation. I remained standing, waiting. "Mom, what's going on? Why are you being so distant? Did I do something wrong?" The question would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. Did I do something wrong? As if he didn't know exactly what he had done. "You really don't know?" I asked in a quiet voice. "No. That's why I'm here. For you to tell me." I walked to the desk and got the cardboard box. I carried it to the coffee table and placed it in front of him. "Open it," I said. Ethan looked at me, confused, but he obeyed. He opened the box and began to take out the papers. The transfer receipts, the list of expenses from the birthday, the document I had written with the total owed. I watched him review every paper in silence. I saw his expression change from confusion to surprise, then to discomfort. "What is this?" he finally asked, though it was obvious he knew exactly what it was. "It's the truth, Ethan, the truth you never wanted to see. Mom, I didn't ask you to send me money all these months. I know, you never asked. But I did it anyway, because I'm your mother, and I thought you needed it. I thought it was my way of staying part of your life." He put the papers down on the table and rubbed his face with his hands. I didn't know you had spent so much. $15,200 in 5 years, Ethan, from a pension of $800 a month. Do you have any idea what that means? It means I lived on almost nothing so that you could have more. But I never asked you to do that. No, you didn't ask. But you also never thanked me. You never asked how I was. You never cared where that money came from. He got up from the sofa and started pacing, nervous. "Mom, I thought you were fine. I thought you had enough. You never told me you were struggling. And when would I have told you, Ethan? Our conversations lasted 2 minutes. You never asked about anything beyond, 'How are you?' And you didn't even wait for my full answer." He fell silent because he knew it was true. "And then," I continued, "you asked me to cook for 20 people for your birthday. I spent $353 of my own pension. I stood for 6 hours cooking. I washed all the dishes. And when I finished, your wife took all the credit and you said nothing. Mom, they left me in the kitchen like I was the help. You didn't even tell the family I was there. And when Aunt Clara asked about me, you told her I was busy, as if I didn't matter." Ethan sat down again, this time with his head in his hands. "You're right. You're completely right. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm truly sorry." The words I had waited so long to hear finally came out of his mouth. But they didn't have the same effect anymore. They didn't heal me. Because I knew they were words born of guilt, not real understanding. "Do you know what hurts the most, Ethan? It's not the money. It's not the work. It's that I ceased to exist for you. I became invisible. I was only useful when you needed something." "That's not true, Mom." "It is true. And the worst part is that I allowed it. I let it happen because I was afraid of losing you. I was afraid that if I stopped giving you money, if I stopped doing what you asked, you would disappear from my life completely." Tears began to roll down my cheeks. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation. But now I understand that I had already lost you anyway. I lost the son who used to hug me. I lost the son who told me he loved me. I lost the son who promised to take care of me when he grew up. Mom, you haven't lost me. I'm right here. Are you here? Are you really here, Ethan? Because I haven't felt your presence in years. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I saw that he was crying too. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to fix this. I sat across from him, exhausted from so many emotions. I don't need you to fix it immediately. I just need you to understand. I need you to see what you did, what you allowed to happen. I see it, Mom. I see it now. We sat in silence for a long time, a heavy silence filled with years of unsaid words, of ungiven hugs, of badly expressed love. So what do you want me to do? He finally asked. I want you to treat me with respect. I want you to value me while I'm alive, not when I'm gone. I want you to see me as a person, not as a tool. I want that when you invite me to your house, it's because you actually want to see me, not because you need something from me. Ethan nodded slowly. And the money? Do you want me to pay you back? That question took me by surprise. I hadn't done all this for the money. I had done it for dignity. I don't want you to pay me back the $15,000, Ethan. That money was a mother's gift. But I do want you to reimburse me the $353 from your birthday. Because that wasn't a gift. That was a job I did, believing you were going to pay me for it. I'll deposit it tomorrow. Thank you. He stood up to leave. But before he reached the door, he stopped. Mom, are you coming to the Christmas dinner? The question hung in the air between us. I don't know, Ethan. I need time. Time to heal. Time to understand if there's really a place for me in your life, or if I only exist when it's convenient. There is a place for you. There always has been. Then show me. Not with words, with actions. He nodded and left my house. I watched him walk to his car, get in, and sit there for a few minutes before driving away. When the car disappeared from view, I closed the door and leaned against it. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically exhausted. But I also felt something new, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt peace. The next day, Saturday morning, I received a notification from my bank, a transfer of $353 from Ethan Reyes. He had kept his word. It was a small first step, but it was a step. Over the next few days, Ethan sent me messages every day. They weren't messages asking for favors. They were simple messages, asking how I was, telling me about his day, sharing photos. Good morning, Mom. Hope you slept well. I saw some flowers today that reminded me of the garden we had when I was a kid. Have you eaten? I just had lunch and thought of your refried beans. Small messages, insignificant to many. But to me, they meant he was trying, that he was trying to rebuild what had been broken. I didn't answer every message immediately. Sometimes I waited hours. Sometimes I waited a full day. I needed him to understand that I had my own life too, my own time, my own priorities. A week before Christmas, I received a call from Chloe. That truly surprised me. She never called me. Eleanor, she said, in a voice that was trying to sound kind. How are you? Fine, I replied cautiously. Look, I'm calling because I want to apologize. Ethan told me everything that happened, and I realize I haven't treated you well. I haven't treated you like you deserve. I said nothing. I waited for her to continue. I know I can't change the past, but I want to try to do things differently from now on. And I want you to know that the Christmas dinner isn't going to be like last time. We're hiring a caterer. We don't want you to cook. We just want you to come as a guest, as part of the family. Her words sounded rehearsed, as if Ethan had told her exactly what to say, but at least she was making the effort. Thank you for the invitation, I said finally. I'll think about it. Okay. I hope you can come. We'd really like that. She hung up, and I was left thinking. Should I go? Should I give them another chance? Or should I keep my distance to protect myself? Christmas morning dawned clear and cold. I woke up early, as always, and made my coffee. I sat by the window, watching the city slowly wake up. Families were leaving their houses dressed in new clothes, carrying gifts, going to celebrate with their loved ones. I still hadn't decided if I was going to Ethan's house. The phone rang at 9 o'clock in the morning. It was him. Mom, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Ethan. So, have you decided if you're coming? I took a deep breath before answering. Yes, I'm coming, but on my conditions. What conditions? I will arrive at 7 o'clock when the dinner begins. I will not cook, I will not serve. I will not wash dishes. I will come as a guest. As your mother. And if at any moment I feel uncomfortable or disrespected, I will leave without giving an explanation. There was a pause on the other end. That seems fair, Mom. Very fair. We'll see you at 7. I hung up and stared at the phone for a moment. I had set clear boundaries. Now I just had to see if they would respect them. I spent the day calmly. I took my time bathing. I put on a nice dress I had bought years ago but rarely wore. I did my hair carefully and put on a little makeup. When I saw myself in the mirror, I saw a different woman. A woman who valued herself. At 6:30, I called a taxi. This time, I wasn't carrying pots or containers. I just had my purse and a small gift I had bought for Ethan. A book about family relationships I'd found at a used bookstore. I arrived at the building at exactly 7 o'clock. The doorman greeted me with a smile and let me pass without question. I went up in the elevator, feeling my heart beat faster. When the doors opened on the 7th floor, Ethan was waiting for me outside his apartment. Mom, he said with a genuine smile, I'm so glad you came. He hugged me. A long, sincere hug, like the ones he used to give me when he was a boy. I felt something inside me soften slightly. We entered the apartment, and I saw it was decorated for Christmas. A large tree in the corner of the living room, bright lights, garlands, soft Christmas music playing, and there were people. Lots of people. I recognized several family members. Helen and Robert, David and Susan, Aunt Clara, other cousins, all talking, laughing, enjoying themselves. When I walked in, several of them turned to look at me. Eleanor, my sister Helen cried, coming over to hug me. It's been so long. Hello, Helen, I replied, returning the hug. One by one, the family members came up to greet me. Hugs, kisses on the cheek, questions about how I'd been. This time, I wasn't hidden in the kitchen. This time, I was visible. This time, I existed. Chloe approached after a few minutes. She was wearing an elegant green dress, her makeup perfect as always. Eleanor, welcome, she said, with a smile that seemed more genuine than the ones before. Come in, make yourself comfortable. Can I get you something to drink? Water would be nice. Thank you. Chloe went to the kitchen and returned with a glass of water with ice and lemon. She handed it to me and then stood in front of me for a moment. I want you to know, I hired a very good catering service. You don't have to do anything. Just enjoy yourself. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. And I also want to apologize again, truly, for everything. I looked her in the eyes, trying to see if she was sincere. I saw something there I hadn't seen before. Shame, maybe, or remorse. I accept your apology, Chloe, and I hope that from now on we can have a different relationship. I hope so too, she said, nodding. At 8 o'clock, dinner was served. A long table with white tablecloths, elegant plates, crystal glasses, and the food was brought out by the catering staff. Turkey, ham, salads, side dishes, bread, desserts. Everything looked beautiful and professional. We sat at the table. This time, Ethan asked me to sit next to him in a place of honor, not in the kitchen. Note hidden, but right there, next to him, visible to everyone. Before we started eating, Ethan stood up with his glass in his hand. I'd like to make a toast, he said in a firm voice. Everyone fell silent, waiting. This Christmas is special to me because I finally understood something very important. I understood that having a family isn't automatic. It's not something that just exists because we share blood. It's something you build every day, with respect, with love, with actions. He looked toward me, and his eyes filled with tears. And I also understood that I have failed. I have failed to value the most important person in my life. My mom. The table was completely silent. Mom, Ethan continued, his voice breaking, you gave me life. You raised me. You loved me unconditionally. And I repaid you with indifference, with forgetfulness, with disrespect. And I am sorry. I am so deeply sorry. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. This year, you gave me the most important lesson of my life. You taught me that love isn't letting people walk all over you, that dignity is worth more than convenience, that a mother also deserves to be seen, valued, and respected. He raised his glass higher. So I toast to you, Mom, for your strength, for your patience, for your love. And I promise, in front of this whole family, that from now on, I am going to treat you as you deserve, like the queen you are. Everyone raised their glasses. To Eleanor, they said in unison. We drank. And when I lowered my glass, I saw that everyone was looking at me with respect, with affection, with acknowledgement. Aunt Clara wiped away her tears. Ethan is right, she said in a trembling voice. Eleanor, you have always been the pillar of this family, and sometimes we take that for granted. But today, this Christmas, we want you to know that we value you. My sister Helen nodded. Forgive me, Eleanor. I failed too. I should have been more present. I should have asked more. I should have supported you. One by one, the family members began to speak, apologizing, acknowledging their lack of attention, promising to change. I listened to it all with tears in my eyes. But this time, they were tears of healing. When everyone had finished speaking, I stood up slowly. The table fell silent, waiting for my words. Thank you, I said, my voice soft but firm. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for recognizing my value. I looked Ethan directly in the eyes. Son, what happened between us hurt. It hurt deeply. But it also taught me something important. It taught me that it's never too late to reclaim my dignity. It's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to demand respect. I took a deep breath before continuing. I forgive you. And I hope we can rebuild our relationship. But this time, it will be different. This time, it will be based on mutual respect, on honest communication, on love expressed with actions, not just words. Ethan stood up and walked over to me. He hugged me tightly, like he hadn't hugged me since he was a teenager. I love you, Mom, he whispered in my ear. And I'm going to prove it to you every day. I love you too, son. We held the embrace for what felt like an eternity. Then we sat down, and the dinner continued, but now with a different atmosphere. An atmosphere of a real family. We ate, we talked, we laughed, we shared stories. We remembered Arthur. We celebrated life. When the dinner ended, Ethan handed me an envelope. Open it, he said. I opened it carefully. Inside was a check for $1,500. What is this? I asked, confused. It's part of the money I sent you over the years. I can't pay back all $15,000 right now, but every month I'm going to deposit a portion until it's all paid. Ethan, you don't have to. Yes, I do, Mom. That money came from your sacrifice. And even though you gave it as a gift, I am receiving it now as a debt of honor, a debt I am going to pay. I took something out of my purse, too, the book I had bought him. This is for you, I said. Read it, reflect, and let's grow together. He took the book and read the title aloud, Healing Family Relationships, a Guide to Reconnecting with Love. He smiled. I will read it, I promise. The night continued with more conversation, with exchanging gifts, with Christmas carols sung softly. At 11 o'clock, I began to say my goodbyes. Ethan insisted on taking me home personally. He wouldn't let me take a taxi. On the way back, we drove in silence for a while. Then he spoke. Mom, do you think we can ever go back to how we were before? I thought about his question for a moment. I don't think we can go back to how we were before, Ethan, because I'm not the same, and I hope you aren't, either. Then we can be something better. We can be a mother and son who respect each other, who communicate honestly, who love each other in a healthy way. I like that, he said, smiling. We arrived at my house. Ethan got out of the car and walked me to the door. Thank you for coming tonight, Mom. It meant a lot to me. Thank you for inviting me. The right way. We hugged one more time, and he left. I went into my house and turned on the lights. Everything was the same as when I had left. My small house, my humble living room, my old kitchen. But I was different. I sat on the sofa and looked around. For the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt peace. I felt I had recovered something I had lost a long time ago. My dignity, my value, my voice. And I understood that sometimes the greatest love we can give isn't silent sacrifice. It's teaching others to value us. It's setting boundaries. It's saying no when necessary. It's demanding respect. Because a mother who respects herself teaches her children the real value of love. I stood up and went to my room. Before getting into bed, I looked at the photo of Arthur I keep on my nightstand. I did it, I told him in a low voice. I found my way back. And that night, for the first time in 5 years, I slept deeply. Without worries, without guilt, without fear, just with the certainty that I had done the right thing and that I would never, ever be invisible again.